What more to life is there aside from road trips and bucket lists? Spending time on the road, being present, and cherishing the day is what it's all about. In this video, I'm going to highlight my 2022 road trip to the Canadian Rockies and Northwest Pacific. And together we'll dive into what a few friends and I were able to accomplish in a relatively short amount of time. If you're planning on treating yourself to a spontaneous road trip to the Canadian Rockies of Alberta or British Columbia, you, my friend, are in for a treat. It doesn't matter if you're Canadian, American, or international, all should come and see this part of the world at least once in their lifetime. And without further ado, this is Road Trips and Bucket Lists.
Going back in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
I've always strived to try and creatively capture any of my travel and adventures, and this trip is no different. I had the honor and privilege to candidly capture plenty of footage and later had the idea of using it as a mock travel guide for you, the people of YouTube. This journey covers a long distance. I drove all the way from my hometown of Niagara Falls to enjoy the majesty of the West. Prior to this road trip during the summer of 2022, I participated in a little side quest in life called planting trees. We worked through contracts in Northern Ontario, then driving through Manitoba, through Saskatchewan, leading us to our final destination in Alberta, where we spent the next 2 months replanting the logged lands of Grande Cache. Matter of fact, I made an entire 30-minute documentary on this topic called Guardians of the Earth. Feel free to find it here on my YouTube channel. After a couple months of work hard, it was now time for a few of us to slip away and play hard. Our journey here starts in the enchanting land of Jasper National Park, a protected area of Alberta only a 3-hour drive from where we had just spent months wandering through the desolate wastelands of timber harvest, planting trees for 8 hours a day, 6 days a week. The overall vibe in Jasper is similar to Banff National Park, but a lot more low-key. Crowds are certainly more sparse, helping to take the edge off if you aren't a fan of crowds. The historic Athabasca Hotel was our lodge of choice, and it is located centrally in the heart of downtown Jasper. It had cozy accommodations and vintage style. It hosted a restaurant on site, a bar and casino area, and even its own nightclub, which was very convenient for something to do at nighttime. Breakfast at the Sun House on the main strip with panoramic views of the surrounding mountains is also a must indulge. We also got to enjoy visiting Malang Canyon, a unique geological feature that showcases caverns of glacial ground rivers that have now turned into waterfalls and ground caves from thousands of years worth of erosion. We also got to spend some time doing some cliff jumping at the scenic crystal clear blue waters of Horseshoe Lake, which was indeed a great time, and it's a perfectly short hike when you arrive to the rock faces of this lake. Lastly, it's worth mentioning the beach at Pyramid Lake is pretty decent as well. Good spot for a picnic and a swim. It should be no surprise with the foreshadowing and allusion to it, our next stop was Banff National Park. In order to maintain a low profile budget for this journey, this is where we start roughing it for the remainder of the trip. From here, our trip consisted of living out of a vehicle and pitching a tent almost every single night wherever we stopped. Banff is most likely Canada's hottest natural sightseeing location, and for a great reason. Unlike Jasper, you will likely find it to be flowing with tourists from around the world. With a robust downtown strip with shops, hotels, nightlife, and basic services, the rest of things to see and do hinge off of this downtown frame outwards in Banff National Park. Here we really enjoyed the restaurants and bars, one of which even had an underground bowling alley. We got a chance to ride a gondola up to the Sulphur Mountain Boardwalk with panoramic views of downtown and Mount Rundle. There's a museum up there, food, live music, gift shop, you know, the works. This gondola up to Sulphur Mountain was definitely a highlight of Banff for me. Everyone knows Lake Louise. It is one of the most sought after sightseeing locations within the park. It is a beautiful glacial water vista with canoeing and hiking around the lake, which makes for an incredible time. Not to mention the lake hosts its own historical Fairmont Chateau Lake Louise, right on the shores of the lake, an iconic hotel that has existed there for over 100 years. However, for all the mainstream attention Lake Louise gets, many people are not even aware of its sister lake just a stone throw down the road. And this is due to its higher difficulty of road access. And this lake I'm referring to is Moraine Lake, which in my opinion is the superior view of the two lakes. In my opinion, this lake really is the crown jewel of the entire park boundary. It is a perfect composition and postcard representation of what Canada's natural beauty has to offer. It has made numerous appearances in pop culture and in background images alike, within the Apple, Windows, and BlackBerry user interfaces. It was even featured on the back of the Canadian $20 banknote in the 1960s and 70s. And this is where we wrap up the Alberta section of our trip. After departing Banff National Park, we begin our journey through interior British Columbia. We pass through numerous parks such as Glacier, Mount Robson, and Yoho Park. Our next stop was Revelstoke, and finding a place to stay in this area simply wouldn't have been possible without www.freecampsites.net. No, this is not a sponsorship. I do highly recommend using this website or similar ones to find free places to pitch a tent or park your vehicle overnight to maximize your budget for the many activities available along this stretch of the mountains. Just outside of Revelstoke, we camped out underneath the Trans-Canada Highway itself. With a propane stove, we cooked ourselves dinner, enjoyed the stars, and fell asleep to the sound of a river flowing nearby. This spot was so chill and low-key that I even returned to it on my way home on the solo stint of my journey back to Ontario. Revelstoke, like many ski towns, does have to come up with summer activities to draw in visitors. We were more in particular interested in the mountain coaster and axe throwing.
Green light, go.
And I gotta say, the mountain coaster was definitely worth a couple of bucks. It was a fun ride from more than halfway up of this giant mountain. Lots of twists and turns. Better yet, go no brakes, you'll have a great time. A locals discount was applied to our bill, which made it all the merrier. Our next activity was, in my opinion, a must experience at least once in your life. It can be found all over North America, with many offerings throughout the Canadian Rockies. This activity is whitewater rafting. We decided to knock this off our list in Golden, British Columbia. The route of this river passes under a brand new section of Trans-Canada Highway with staggering perspectives of valley to mountaintop views. We all got on a bus and headed down to the river landing, where we were briefed by our awesome tour guide and directed as a team in order to safely navigate the threshing water. At the halfway point, our tour guide casually asked us if we are thirsty, to which just about everyone was like, oh, yeah. You'd be surprised just how thirsty you can get, only from a few minutes of vigorously paddling downstream. We docked the boats and were given the option to either swim in the river or walk up to an exposed rock wall with pouring water. This was the first time I learned you could drink running glacial water out there in nature, and it blew my mind. Clean, crisp, satisfying, and refreshing water, if you ask me. If you don't mind getting splashed in a little bit of cold water, whitewater rafting is definitely a great time, and I highly recommend it. Our next stop really switched things up for the trip so far. This is where we entered what felt like desert climate in the dead of August in Kelowna, British Columbia, popularly dubbed Kelownafornia. As a group, we had decided we wanted to take the pace down for a couple of days and earn a few bucks. What we had in mind was fruit picking. Kelowna sits in a greater region named after the lake that it resides on, called Okanagan Lake. In the Okanagan, where there isn't urban sprawl, there is lush agriculture with many fruits and vineyards alike. We arranged to try our hand at cherry picking, and this is how it played out. We arrived thinking this is a great idea. We ended up setting up our tent in between the cherry orchards, which was super unexpected and a refreshing change of camping scenery. We went to bed and woke up at 2 a.m. to start picking, since the fruit will bruise in the midday heat. The first 15 minutes were fun. Eating the fresh cherries and standing on a ladder to pick them with a headlamp on in the dark was definitely a different way of making money. But it wasn't long before we realized that cherry picking isn't all that easy. The fruit hangs low and high and out of sight, and you are paid per basket. not per hour. It was definitely a cool one-time experience, but it really was little more than frustration and free snacks. I would never do it again, and in a matter of 4 hours, I made a whopping $18. That same morning as the sun rose and the night turned into day, we all decided to seriously reconsider our decision to pick fruit. The combination of low pay for beginners and having to sleep in near 40 degrees Celsius weather during the day in a tent while working at night was an immediate no, and we did quit the same morning that we started. We spent the next night in Kelowna at a motel, away from the heat and out of a tent. We bar hopped, hit the rippers, and most importantly, I even got a much needed haircut. Well shit. If I am a scruffy motherfucker.
I'm so shaky. Let's see.
Man's fresh.
It doesn't even look the same.
So
Who
with
are
a fresh
you?
cut, where do we roll to from there? We went to Vancouver, a city that I always enjoy and have continued to visit more and more over the years. I have a few buddies that we visited with there from my hometown, and they were polite enough to offer us a place to crash in their condo, right downtown, which was of course a welcome switch up, again, from sleeping in the tent, as well as going out for dinner and drinks 2 nights in a row. But I gotta say, the vertical urban foreground of Vancouver to the background of the Rocky Mountain Range cradling the city is always a visual treat whenever I visit. Next up, we hopped on BC Ferry and we headed out to Vancouver Island. Caught a movie in Nanaimo and pitched a tent in a deserted logging site near Cameron Lake. The next morning, we drove down the street to the famous Cathedral Grove. Many areas in the Pacific Northwest have the right climate, altitude, and humidity to foster the growth of full-blown temperate rainforests. These oxygen and moisture-rich conditions foster the growth of massive pine trees, sphagnums, and lichen. Effectively, it's a pine rainforest with its own unique fauna. Using a river nearby with drinkable glacial water, we filled up before departing with enough water to sustain us for the next few days. Next, we drove through the interior of Vancouver Island. Venturing through the middle of the island, you straddle beautiful streams, lakes, and mountains, of course. Swimming in Kennedy Lake was one of our favorite highlights of this part of the journey. Finally, we arrived at the Pacific Ocean, the end of our trip. We set up our tents here in Iqaluit, a cheaper alternative to camping out directly in Tofino. Here we visited downtown Tofino and got to experience surfing for the very first time. I figured since I'm an avid snowboarder it would be easy peasy, but surfing is a whole other beast. I found that mastering getting on the board was definitely all about the timing, and as you're paddling in the water and that wave begins to push you forward, you really have to feel out the timing of that exact thrust that the wave gives you, in which it's time to get on top of the board. Not to mention that you need to stay on top of the board and remain balanced. But once you get the hang of it, it's really satisfying. I didn't find that the beach in Tofino had particularly large waves, which was great for a beginner surf trip. The Pacific coast of Tofino is just honestly such a magical place, and it is somewhere that I look forward to spending more time in. Not to mention the people there are great, and the culture seems to be pretty cool. From here we head backwards through the interior of Vancouver Island, from Tofino and back to Nanaimo, just to hop on a BC ferry again. That night we stay in Burnaby, and we wake up the next day to drive back through Vancouver up the Sea to Sky Highway into Whistler. That same day I tried to call for a slot for the fully booked Whistler Bungee jump. To my surprise, I was promptly called back with an offer of booking thanks to a cancellation. This location is very scenic, with views of a flowing river below, a very far down river below, I may add, with snow-capped mountaintops just nearby. Here I made an attempt at a backflip, which ended up a bit wonky, but man, was it ever a blast. Bungee jumping is never not worth the money, and such a great rush of adrenaline. You could be having the worst day ever until you have a bungee jump, and you'll be brand new and fixed up in no time. To add to this bungee jump, on the same turnoff road from the highway to where the road begins for Whistler Bungee, there's also a massive campsite under the temperate rainforest pines with really great views of the stars. It's quiet, it's clean, And most interestingly, it is a campsite in which you are only required to donate to stay there. It works off of a cash donation bin and operates as a first come first served basis. It's a really great place to stay on a budget if you just want to pop up a tent for a night or two. Furthermore, Whistler Village is a neat place to visit in the summer or winter. The key highlight activity in the summer being mountain biking, which, truth be told, was one of the only major activities we missed on our road trip of bucket lists. We spent a couple of hours exploring the village and hanging out by Lost Lake. Simply put, the whole area is a beautiful Sunday drive. And north of Whistler, near some of the beautiful glacial water lakes, I even managed to break my 4-year no drone crash streak. Drones rarely stand a chance functioning afterwards a crash, but for whatever reason, my drone just refuses to die. Been about 3.5 years since I crashed one. I'd say it's about my time. Well, shit. Oh my god, it fucking works. What a beast! After recovering the drone, with now almost 2 weeks of driving around and having a blast, funds were running low, and it was time to say goodbye to my new friends that I had just met tree planting this summer. North of Whistler and Lillooet, my friend's vehicle broke down. The 3 girls I traveled with decided to stick together and get the vehicle fixed, since they had a little bit of additional plans in Alberta in mind. However, with my still functioning vehicle, it was about appropriate time I headed back home to Ontario, almost 4,500 kilometers away. From Lillooet, I drove on my own through Kamloops, back down to Banff and Canmore, through Calgary to Regina, out to Winnipeg, through the Ontario border, and back through Ontario cottage country with a few stops. With plenty of signs of familiarity, I passed through the Greater Toronto area and back home to Niagara Falls, my hometown. Hell of a drive, and doing it with good company is one thing, but tripping this distance solo is a soul crusher. Not to mention, driving late into the night, I didn't want to set up a tent, so I would crash in the car. It took me all the way until Saskatchewan, where I set up this hilariously unfinished tent just to get out of the car for a night. And then Ontario, I was able to get a motel and crash at a friend's house. Hopefully this video shows you exactly what is possible in making a great bare bones leap across the Canadian landmass on a budget in this style. If you are a Canadian that hasn't made a road trip across a country like this, I highly recommend and implore you to do so. This was my second time doing this kind of trip, and it was a pleasure, and I cannot wait till next time. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. Hopefully this video has inspired you to make your own road trip to the Canadian Rockies and see what they have to offer. Don't forget to make your bucket list and check them twice. Happy road tripping.